Have you ever noticed that the more you talk, explain, and chase, the more he drifts away? It's not about playing games, it's about understanding the power of your energy and the quiet strength you carry. In today's message, we're diving deep into the 6 silences that don't just make a man notice you, they make him chase you obsessively. These silences aren't about manipulation, they're about strategy, self-respect, and teaching him the value of your presence without saying a word. When you learn to embrace these quiet, intentional pauses, you stop being the one constantly giving, constantly explaining, and constantly chasing, and instead, you become the woman he can't stop thinking about, dreaming about, and wanting to be near. Silence becomes your strength when you stop explaining what a real man should already understand. There is a point in every woman's journey when she realizes that repeating herself over and over is exhausting and unproductive. You begin to see that your words, your explanations, your reminders, they're not the problem. The problem lies in being unheard, in investing in someone who refuses to recognize your worth. And that's when silence transforms from being a simple pause into a weapon of empowerment, a shield of protection, and a declaration of self-respect. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is simply stop talking, stop pleading, stop proving her value to someone who hasn't earned the right to fully see it. Silence gives you the power to step back, to reclaim your energy, and to stop being the one constantly trying to carry a relationship that should be shared equally. It allows you to remind a man, without a single word, that your love is not cheap, your attention is not guaranteed, and your heart is not an object to be taken for granted. A man who is used to hearing your voice constantly, who is accustomed to your patience and your willingness to explain every detail, suddenly feels a shift when you stop talking. Silence has a way of making him confront the behavior he ignored, the feelings he dismissed, and the effort he failed to match. It forces him to see the spaces he once filled with indifference, the moments he allowed to slide, and the opportunities he wasted. Because a man can ignore what a woman says, but he cannot ignore the absence that her silence creates. That quietness holds weight. That pause carries meaning. That space you leave behind becomes the mirror he never wanted to face, showing him the reality of how much he took for granted. Silence also reconnects you to your own power. It allows you to step out of the exhausting cycle of over-explaining and into a place of clarity and self-awareness. You start recognizing your value in ways you couldn't when you were busy justifying yourself to someone who refused to see your worth. You begin to understand that your peace is more important than his understanding, that your self-respect is more valuable than his approval, and that your boundaries are stronger than his neglect. And when he notices this shift, when he realizes that you are no longer bending yourself to meet his expectations, it triggers reflection. He starts thinking about what he did wrong, what he ignored, and what he might lose if he doesn't step up. The beauty of silence is that it teaches without raising your voice. It educates without forcing a lesson. It communicates without confrontation. And it transforms the dynamics of the relationship because it allows you to stand firm in your worth while giving him the space to understand the value he previously overlooked. Your quiet strength becomes a language of its own, one that demands respect, commands attention, and honors your dignity. It reminds him that love is not something to be taken lightly, that patience has its limits, and that a woman who knows her value will not settle for anything less than she deserves. When a woman stops explaining, she steps into freedom, she steps into confidence, she steps into power, and that power reverberates in ways that no argument or plea ever could. He begins to notice, he begins to feel, he begins to realize the silence doesn't just protect you, it elevates you. It teaches him lessons he ignored, it strengthens your spirit, and it sets a new standard for how he must show up if he wants to keep you engaged and valued. The moment you embrace the strength of silence, everything changes because words can be forgotten, explanations can be dismissed, but the absence of your voice, when it carries purpose, cannot be ignored. When you pull back, You give him space to recognize the value he took for granted. Sometimes a man doesn't truly see you until he can't feel your presence the way he used to. When you're always available, always giving, always trying, he starts believing that your energy is endless and your loyalty is unshakable. But the moment you pull back, even just a little, the shift hits him like a wake-up call. He starts noticing the difference in the way you respond, the time you take, the distance that suddenly exists where closeness used to be. That space, that silence, that pause, it becomes the pressure he never expected but desperately needs. Because pulling back doesn't mean you've stopped caring. It means you've started caring about yourself. It means you're no longer pouring into someone who isn't pouring back. It means you're tired of carrying the whole connection on your shoulders. When you step back, you allow him to step forward, and that's when he has to face a truth he's been ignoring. Your effort was never guaranteed. Your love was never owed. Your presence was never something he earned once and kept forever without work. Pulling back forces him to evaluate the comfort zone he built while assuming you'd always stay the same. Men begin to think differently when a woman pulls her energy away. Suddenly, the text message he used to ignore becomes the message he reads twice. The call he used to dismiss becomes the call he feels guilty for not returning. The attention he once took lightly becomes the attention he starts craving. Your distance triggers his awareness. Your absence triggers his memory. Your silence triggers his fear of losing what he didn't protect. A man will always chase what he believes he can't easily replace. Pulling back also allows you to see the truth with clearer eyes. You start noticing whether he cares enough to close the gap. You see whether he steps up when you step away. You see whether he matches your energy or whether he lets the silence stretch because your presence mattered only when it required no effort. That distance becomes your filter. It reveals who wants you and who just wants the benefits of you. And when a man realizes you're no longer leaning in, he has to decide if he's mature enough to meet you halfway or if he'll lose a woman who brought value, peace, and purpose into his life. Your pullback is your power move. It commands respect without attitude. It demands effort without words. It resets the dynamic without drama. You're not punishing him, you're positioning yourself. And a woman who positions herself with confidence becomes a woman he can't ignore, a woman he starts fighting for, a woman he finally realizes he should have been appreciating all along. Your quiet distance teaches him faster than any argument ever will. You can talk, explain, plead, repeat yourself 1,000 times, but if a man isn't ready to listen, your words will bounce off walls he's already built. Some men don't learn through conversations. They learn through consequences, and nothing delivers consequences more clearly than a woman pulling back in silence. That quiet shift hits him in a place no long speech ever could. It makes him feel what he refused to hear. It forces him to sit with the reality he brushed off when your voice was loud and your heart was open. Silence has a way of exposing truth. It exposes how comfortable he had become with you fixing everything. It exposes how he relied on you to smooth over problems, initiate the hard talks, carry the emotional weight. When you stop doing that, when you stop showing up the same way, he feels the void instantly. Suddenly, the loyalty he took lightly starts to feel precious. The affection he didn't reciprocate starts to feel rare. The attention he took advantage of becomes something he wishes he hadn't wasted. Your silence becomes the mirror he never wanted to look into, and it shows him exactly where he failed. Your quiet distance also forces him to reflect not just on you, but on himself. When you're no longer explaining what hurt you, he has to figure it out. When you're no longer spelling out what you need, he has to pay attention. Silence makes him analyze his own behavior in a way your words never could, because a man can ignore your voice, but he cannot ignore the silence that replaces it. Your silence becomes the space where he starts to realize that you were patient, you were giving, you were loyal, and he didn't match that. And when a man starts losing the version of you that loved him the loudest, he begins to understand the weight of what he's risking. Quiet distance also builds your strength in ways you may not expect. It reminds you that you don't have to fight to be seen. You don't have to argue to be valued. You don't have to raise your voice to prove your worth. When you get quiet, you gain clarity. You see what effort looks like without your influence. You see whether he comes forward on his own or stays still. You see whether he actually wants you or just wants the comfort you provided. Silence gives you answers that arguments could never reveal. And when he feels that shift, when he senses that your energy is no longer wrapped around him the way it used to be, something awakens in him. He feels the fear of losing someone who brought peace, understanding, and love into his life. He feels the pressure to step up, to communicate, to change. Because your silence didn't push him away, it pulled the truth forward. And that truth will always speak louder than any argument you could ever make. A woman who protects her peace becomes a woman a man chases to keep. Peace is one of the most powerful things you can carry in your life, and when a woman learns to guard it, value it, and refuse to let anyone disturb it, she becomes magnetic in a way words can't describe. A woman who chooses peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over validation starts walking with a different kind of strength. It's not loud, it's not showy, it's not dramatic, it's steady, confident, and unmistakable. Men feel that energy the moment it enters a room, because there's nothing more attractive than a woman who knows what disrupts her spirit and isn't afraid to remove herself from anything that threatens it. Protecting your peace doesn't mean you're cold. It doesn't mean you're unloving. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've learned that your heart is not a playground. It means you've learned that your mind deserves rest, not stress. It means you've learned that your soul needs nurturing, not draining. You stop entertaining conversations that go nowhere. You stop participating in cycles that break you. You stop explaining the same thing to a man who doesn't respect your voice. And the moment you make those decisions, something powerful happens. You start rising, your energy shifts, you begin to glow differently, your confidence builds from the inside out, you become more selective, more intentional, more aware of what aligns with your peace and what disrupts it. That transformation doesn't go unnoticed. A man can ignore a lot of things, but he cannot ignore the glow of a woman who has reclaimed her peace. When he sees you no longer bothered by his silence, no longer shaken by his inconsistency, no longer affected by his mixed signals, he starts asking himself questions he never asked before. He wonders why you're so calm now. He wonders why you don't react the way you used to. He wonders why you're unbothered by things that once held your emotions hostage. That calmness, that control, that elevation, it rattles him because he realizes that he no longer has access to your emotions the way he once did. A peaceful woman becomes unpredictable in the best way, not because she's playing games, but because she has standards now. She has limits. She has boundaries. She has learned that she cannot carry a relationship alone, cannot heal a man who refuses to grow, cannot sacrifice herself just to keep the peace with someone who creates the chaos. When she understands that protecting her peace is her responsibility, not his, she moves differently. She doesn't chase. She doesn't beg. She doesn't force anything. She lets people show who they really are, and she responds accordingly, not aggressively, not emotionally, but peacefully. That energy makes a man think deeply. Because when a woman stops arguing, stops trying to fix things, stops fighting for a connection that only she is fighting for, he feels the loss instantly. Not the loss of her presence, because she may still be around, but the loss of her investment, her attention, her emotional availability. A man can feel when a woman's heart steps back, even if her body hasn't moved an inch. He can sense when she stops depending on him for her happiness, and that realization creates a new kind of urgency inside him. He begins to chase not because he fears your silence, but because he fears the version of you that silence has built. A woman who protects her peace becomes a woman who commands respect without raising her voice. Her quietness holds weight. Her boundaries speak clearly. Her decisions carry authority. She doesn't have to yell to be heard. She doesn't have to explain to be understood. She doesn't have to threaten to be taken seriously. Her peace becomes her armor. Her peace becomes her language. Her peace becomes her standard. And any man who wants to be in her life must meet her at that level. When a man encounters a woman like this, he has two choices: rise or retreat. He can step up, adjust, grow, and match the energy she embodies, or he can step back and let her go, knowing he cannot meet the expectations she deserves. But what he can't do is remain the same. Her peace challenges him. It exposes him. It shows him where he needs to grow. A woman's peace is like a mirror, revealing whether he brings calm or chaos, security or stress, effort or excuses. And men who genuinely care will rise, they will chase, they will try. Because a peaceful woman is rare, and a man who has experienced her presence will feel the emptiness the moment she withdraws it. A woman who protects her peace also becomes more aligned with her purpose. She attracts different opportunities. She attracts healthier connections. She attracts people who value emotional maturity, honesty, and accountability. She no longer entertains situations that drain her, and that shift elevates every part of her life. Her friendships grow, her career flourishes, her self-love deepens, her intuition sharpens. She becomes whole in a way she didn't know she needed. That wholeness is what makes her irresistible. Not because she's trying to be, but because peace makes a woman glow from the inside out. A man doesn't chase a woman just because she's beautiful. He chases the woman who brings peace. He chases the woman who brings calm to his chaos. He chases the woman who carries herself with grace, self-respect, and emotional maturity. He chases the woman who knows how to love, but also knows how to walk away from anything that threatens her healing. A woman who protects her peace shows that she can stand alone if she must. She doesn't need a man to complete her. She desires a man who complements her. And that difference makes all the difference. Peace is powerful because it's rare. Peace is attractive because it's healing. Peace is magnetic because it speaks to the deepest part of a man's spirit. And when a man finds a woman who has mastered the art of protecting her peace, he knows she is not just another option. She is the kind of woman a man wants in his future, the kind of woman he wants to grow with, the kind of woman he doesn't want to lose. Because a peaceful woman is not just loved, she is chased, respected, and cherished in a way that comes from a man who finally understands the value of a woman who protects her peace. Silence flips the script. Suddenly, he's the one trying to earn the attention he once wasted. There comes a point in every woman's life when she gets tired of being the only one putting in the emotional labor, tired of texting first, tired of explaining herself, tired of making excuses for a man who never did the same for her. And when that exhaustion hits a certain level, the silence that follows isn't passive, it's purposeful, it's strategic, it's healing, it's powerful in a way that shakes the entire dynamic. Because when a woman decides to stop giving her energy to someone who doesn't value it, everything changes, and it changes fast. Silence is not about manipulation or punishment. It's about stepping back long enough for him to see what life feels like without your voice guiding him, your presence grounding him, your effort carrying the relationship. When you stop talking, he starts hearing. When you stop chasing, he starts noticing. When you stop giving him the comfort of your consistency, he begins to feel the discomfort of his own neglect. And that shift hits him harder than any argument you could have ever had, because silence creates a vacuum, and in that vacuum, he finally feels the absence he never believed would come. A man who once ignored your calls begins checking his phone. A man who once responded late starts responding instantly. A man who once took days to text back suddenly feels uneasy when hours go by without hearing from you. Silence disrupts his rhythm. It disrupts his comfort. It disrupts the version of you he grew accustomed to. He thought your patience was permanent. He thought your loyalty was unshakable. He thought you'd always be there, always waiting, always understanding, always forgiving. But silence introduces him to a version of you that is done explaining and done settling. There's a confidence in silence that words can't compete with. A woman who embraces silence is a woman who has realized her worth doesn't need validation. She doesn't need to argue to prove a point. She doesn't need to beg for basic respect. She doesn't need to force someone to treat her the way she deserves. Instead, she lets her absence speak. She lets her quietness do the work, because silence is the language of standards. Silence is the language of self-respect. Silence is the language of people who are tired of repeating themselves. Your silence shows him what your presence was worth. It shows him that your laughter, your energy, your loyalty, your softness, your care, none of that was guaranteed. It shows him that you were giving something rare, something genuine, something deep, and he mischanneled it. And when he realizes that, when he finally connects the dots, he begins to chase not out of pride, but out of fear. Fear that he ruined something irreplaceable. Fear that your silence signals the beginning of a life where he is no longer included. Fear that you might be done doing the emotional heavy lifting he took for granted. Some men don't learn until you stop showing up. They don't feel until you stop speaking. They don't realize until you stop giving. And once you go quiet, they start replaying everything you once said, trying to figure out where they went wrong. Silence makes him reflect on conversations he dismissed, warnings he ignored, and moments he brushed off. It makes him realize that you weren't asking for too much. You were asking for the bare minimum. It makes him understand that you weren't dramatic, you were disappointed. You weren't needy, you were unappreciated. You weren't distant, you were drained. When the silence sets in, he begins to chase because he senses something has changed within you. You're no longer reacting. You're no longer emotionally available on demand. You're no longer making him the center of your emotional world. And that forces him to step into a role he avoided, the role of the pursuer. He starts paying attention. He starts putting in effort. He starts adjusting his behavior because he knows that if he doesn't, your silence will become permanent. And the thought of losing a woman who loved him through his inconsistency scares him more than he ever expected. Silence also gives you something powerful: freedom. Freedom from the cycle of trying to be enough for someone who didn't see how much you were already giving. Freedom from emotional exhaustion. Freedom from explaining your worth. While he scrambles to win back your attention, you begin to see yourself more clearly. You realize how strong you are. You realize how patient you've been. You realize how much you deserve. And with that realization comes a new level of confidence that is nearly impossible for any man to ignore. A woman in her silence moves differently. She chooses herself. She prioritizes her peace. She stops giving discounts to someone who never paid full price. She becomes more whole, more grounded, more focused. And the more she rises, the more he chases. Because silence doesn't just flip the script, it rewrites the whole story. The man who once felt secure now feels uncertain. The man who once took advantage now takes accountability. The man who once assumed you'd stay now fears you'll go. Your silence awakens a side of him he didn't know he had. It forces him to step up. It forces him to show up. It forces him to prove himself in ways he avoided when you were doing all the emotional work. And whether he rises to the challenge or not, silence gives you clarity about who truly belongs in your life. Because when a woman stops speaking, she starts seeing. And when she starts seeing, she starts choosing differently. And when she starts choosing differently, a man either levels up to meet her standards or finds himself chasing a woman who finally realized she was never the one who needed to be earned. He was when you stop talking, he starts thinking, and that's when realization hits hard. Sometimes a man doesn't wake up until the noise is gone. As long as you're explaining, reminding, pleading, and trying to guide him, he can tune you out because he knows your voice will always be there. He knows he can fall back on your patience. He knows he can rely on your heart to soften. But the moment that voice goes quiet, the moment that steady stream of effort disappears, something in him gets triggered. Silence creates a space he can't escape from, and in that space, he finally has to confront the truth he's been avoiding. Your silence becomes the moment he realizes you were the one holding everything together. You were the balance. You were the consistency. You were the person making effort seem normal. When you stop speaking, he starts replaying every conversation he dismissed, every concern he brushed off, every moment he took lightly. He starts asking himself why you're quiet now, why you're distant, why your energy has shifted. He feels the change before he fully understands it. But once he realizes that your silence isn't an attitude, it's an awakening, everything inside him begins to scramble. Silence forces him to think about what you've been carrying. It forces him to consider how many times he ignored what you needed because he assumed you'd always be there. It forces him to remember the times you were hurting while he was comfortable. When your voice stops smoothing over problems, he finally feels the sharp edges of his own actions. When your voice stops filling the empty spaces, he hears the emptiness loud and clear. That's what makes silence powerful. It doesn't just mute your voice, it amplifies everything he's been refusing to hear. A woman's silence makes a man analyze himself in ways your words never could. He starts thinking about the things he didn't say, the effort he didn't give, the moments he didn't show up. He starts wondering if he pushed you too far, if he waited too long, if he misjudged your loyalty. And that wondering turns into worry when he realizes your silence is peaceful, not emotional. A woman who is done talking is a woman who has entered a different level of strength. Not the kind that yells or argues, but the kind that steps back, regains control, and lets her absence do the speaking. When a woman stops talking, the energy changes. You no longer react. You no longer explain. You no longer take responsibility for his lack of effort. You move with quiet intention. That calmness scares him more than anger ever could, because anger means you still care enough to fight. Silence means you're tired. Silence means you've reached your limit. Silence means he pushed the wrong woman too far. And men know deep down that silence is the moment before a woman makes a life-changing decision. A man begins to think differently when he senses that shift. He starts to question what he believed was secure. He starts to feel uncertain about the things he took for granted. He wonders whether you've lost interest or whether someone else is giving you the peace he didn't. That fear wakes him up. That silence wakes him up. It forces him to evaluate the kind of man he's been, not the kind of man he pretended to be. A woman's silence strips away his excuses and exposes his reality, and that realization can hit him harder than any confrontation. The beauty of silence is that it gives you time to reconnect with yourself. While he's thinking, you're healing. While he's panicking, you're recovering. While he's reflecting, you're rebuilding. Silence allows you to recharge emotionally. It allows you to remember who you were before you started bending yourself to fit someone else's needs. It gives you the clarity to see the difference between love and attachment, between effort and obligation, between a partner and a placeholder. When you stop talking, you begin hearing yourself again, and that inner voice becomes your compass. Silence also reveals his intentions. A man who truly cares will come closer when you go quiet. He'll initiate conversations. He'll show effort. He'll try to understand what's wrong instead of ignoring it. He'll step into the space you created instead of running from it. But a man who never cared will only care that you're no longer easy to access. Silence is the test that exposes who's meant for you and who's just around because it was convenient. When you stop talking, you stop giving him the emotional shortcuts he used to rely on. He can no longer depend on your reassurance. He can no longer hide behind your empathy. He can no longer blame misunderstandings on your delivery. Silence makes him sit with himself, and that's the hardest place for anyone to sit. It's in that quiet that he realizes what you brought into his life. Not just love, but stability. Not just affection, but understanding. Not just presence, but purpose. He sees everything he overlooked because now he has to face the possibility of losing it. And as he thinks, you rise. You step into a version of yourself that no longer explains or accepts the bare minimum. You grow stronger, wiser, calmer. You start loving yourself more deeply. You start setting boundaries that aren't negotiable, and that growth makes you even more magnetic. Nothing draws a man in like a woman who has learned to choose her peace over validation, her voice over the noise, her self-worth over someone else's inconsistency. Silence is not withdrawal, it's elevation. Silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. Silence is not distance, it's protection. When you stop talking, he starts thinking. And in that thinking, he either steps up like a man who finally understands your value, or he loses the privilege of being in your life. Either way, silence clears the path for you to rise into the woman you were always meant to be. There comes a moment when your silence stops being a reaction and becomes a revelation, when you finally understand that not every situation deserves your voice, and not every man has earned the privilege of your access. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is pull back and let the truth echo on its own. You stop arguing, you stop explaining, you stop trying to convince someone to value what they should have recognized from day one. And in that stillness, something shifts. He starts replaying everything you ever said, every moment he overlooked, every warning he dismissed. Because silence has a way of magnifying what noise used to cover. It forces him to sit with himself, with his choices, with the space you left behind. And that space speaks louder than any words you could have thrown his way. This silence isn't cold, it's clarity. It's the version of you who knows her worth too well to beg for what should flow naturally. It's the you who realizes that if a man can ignore your voice, he will never be ready for the weight of your heart. So you stop rescuing him from the consequences he created. You stop shielding him from the discomfort of losing you. You let him feel the emptiness he thought he'd never have to face. And suddenly he starts checking the phone he used to ignore, replaying the memories he used to minimize, chasing the energy he didn't respect when he had access to it. This silence becomes the mirror he can't avoid. It shows him the difference between your presence and every other woman's. It shows him the peace you brought, the stability you carried, the softness he took for granted. It shows him that your absence isn't a punishment, it's a lesson that teaches him you weren't asking for too much, he was giving too little. A lesson that shows him love can't survive where effort doesn't live. And while he's busy realizing you're busy rising, you're learning to prioritize your own peace, reconnecting with your power, rediscovering the parts of yourself you silence for the sake of keeping the relationship comfortable. And the more you grow, the more he feels the distance. The more confident you become, the more he feels the loss. Because silence doesn't just make him miss you, it makes him understand you. It makes him see the difference between a woman who stays because she's tolerated and a woman who stays because she's valued. And once he realizes which one you were, that silence becomes the very thing that wakes him up in ways your words never could. A confident silence tells him you're not afraid to choose yourself first. There's a power in quiet confidence that no words can replicate. When a woman decides to place her worth above someone else's approval, she sends a message louder than any argument, louder than any plea, louder than any explanation ever could. It's not about being distant or cold, it's about being centered. It's about showing that your heart has limits, your energy has boundaries, and your peace is non-negotiable. A confident silence is a signal that you value yourself enough to stop compromising, stop explaining, stop justifying, and start living in alignment with your truth. When he sees that he can no longer take you for granted because he realizes your presence is a choice, not a guarantee. Confidence in silence is also about self-awareness. You understand your worth and refuse to settle for less than respect, honesty, and genuine effort. You no longer seek validation from someone who cannot appreciate your value. You no longer explain your feelings to someone who refuses to understand. You no longer chase someone who does not match your energy. That confident pause is a reflection of your inner power. It's a subtle way of saying, I am enough on my own, and I will not diminish myself for anyone who does not see my value. And that realization, when it hits a man, makes him sit up, Take notice and reflect on the ways he may have failed to honor you. A confident silence also allows him to face himself. It forces him to consider the times he ignored your needs, dismissed your feelings, or took your patience for granted. When you stop talking, he starts thinking, and that thinking becomes a mirror to his actions. It's uncomfortable for him because he can no longer hide behind your explanations or your efforts. He can no longer assume that you will always be there regardless of how he treats you. He begins to realize that a woman of substance does not waste her energy on those unwilling to match her worth, and that realization awakens a desire to step up, not out of fear, but out of recognition that he has been given a rare opportunity to hold something extraordinary. The beauty of confident silence is that it protects you while simultaneously teaching lessons without raising your voice. You maintain your dignity, you preserve your energy, you create space for him to either rise to your level or reveal that he cannot, and through that silence you also find your own clarity. You reconnect with yourself, your goals, your peace, and your priorities. You remember that your happiness is not dependent on his approval, that your love is not a tool to manipulate, and that your presence is a gift, not a right. When a man encounters a woman who carries herself with this quiet, unshakable confidence, it changes everything. He realizes that she cannot be taken for granted. He realizes that effort must be earned, that respect must be maintained, and that love is a two-way street. Confidence in silence is transformative because it flips the dynamic. Instead of you chasing, he is the one evaluating, reflecting, and ultimately learning that keeping your attention, affection, and presence requires integrity, intention, and consistency. A confident silence is not emptiness, it is power, it is protection. It is a woman standing firm in her worth and refusing to settle for anything less than she deserves. As we close today, remember this: your silence is not emptiness, it is your power. It's the quiet strength that shows him you will no longer settle for anything less than what you deserve. These 6 silences are not about games. They are about teaching respect, protecting your peace, and honoring your worth. When you embrace them, you stop chasing, stop over-explaining, and stop lowering your standards, and suddenly he begins to notice what he once took for granted. He begins to chase, to reflect, and to realize the true value of a woman who knows her worth. Your silence speaks louder than any words. It demands attention, respect, and intention. It shows him that your love is precious, your presence is a gift, and your heart will not be treated carelessly. As you step into this quiet authority, you reclaim your power, your peace, and your self-respect. You become a woman who no man can ignore, a woman who sets the standard for how she wants to be treated, and a woman who inspires others to rise in their own worth. Your silence isn't passive, it's transformative, magnetic, and unstoppable.